Okay, so when we deal, how many people are familiar with Lucy or Dinknesh? Okay, so Dinknesh goes back about 3.2 million years. It was discovered in Ethiopia in 1974. It was an American anthropologist named Donald Johanson who discovered or uncovered her. It's about 40% intact. At that time, it was the most intact and the oldest fossil that they found. Okay, it is the classification of Australopithecus afarensis. So this group, died out long time ago. We're classified as Homo sapiens sapiens, and even though anthropologists, especially European anthropologists, try to say that Homo sapiens sapiens came into existence 100,000 to 200,000 years old, many of our African study scholars have talked about us going back at least 300,000 years. And there's an article from New York Times Science section, February 2010, called "On Crete, Evidence of Ancient Mariners," something like that. Okay, and they talk about African presence on the Greek island of Crete going back 130,000 years ago, and us sailing to the Greek island of Crete. And it said that it's causing them to totally have to rethink everything. Okay, so they're starting to learn what our scholars have been saying, just like many of our scholars were saying years ago that Pluto is not a planet. Just a few years ago, astronomers had to admit it. Okay, so there are only 8 planets in this galaxy. Okay, all right, so now, she was named Lucy because the expedition team that discovered her that night, they were playing the song by the Beatles, "Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds," all right? One of our great African Center scholars, Dr. Yosef Ben Yakinen, said if she was found in Ethiopia, she was found in Africa, she has to be an African woman, so we have to give her an African name. So he named her Dinknesh, okay, which means basically means you are amazing. It's in the Amharic language, which is the ancient language of Ethiopians, okay? All right, now, how many people are familiar with this sister? Dr. Frances Cress Wilson, one of our great scholar warriors. She just did a lecture in Detroit, April 20th. The Cress Theory of Racism, Surviving Racism in the 21st Century, and I've interviewed her twice on my show now. She's the author of the ISIS Papers, okay? She's a psychiatrist, former professor at Howard University also, and she's an expert on racism. And she, as well as Dr. Nellie Fuller, have always talked about and always taught us, if you do not understand European white supremacy, what it is and how it works, everything else that you think that you understand will totally confuse you, okay? And when I do my other presentations, I go more in depth and deal with European white supremacy and racism, and understanding racism as a power structure, understanding racism as a system that evolves over a 300-year period of time from the 16th to 18th centuries, okay, coming out of the slave trade. So here I just don't have a lot of time to get into that, but that's what we have to understand, because unfortunately, one of the reasons why I do that in my presentations is because oftentimes when I would see debates on CNN, I rarely watch Fox News. I can't stand that channel. Fox, oh my God. Oh my God. But when I would see debates, MSNBC, things like this, or we have Reverend Al Sharpton or Jesse Jackson, something like that on there, talking about racism, they almost never, ever define from a historical perspective what racism is. So today people are totally confused about it and don't understand how to fight it. So this sister is fantastic, and people like her. Okay, so this is one of the reasons I have her in here, because we have to honor this. And she's almost 80 years old also. Okay. All right, now the significance of these are in no particular order. Okay, so I just want you to know that we have Queen Mother Harriet Tubman. All right, Queen Mother Harriet Tubman lived from 1820 to 1913. A lot of people are taught about Harriet Tubman in school, but I don't think we're really taught enough about this sister. All right, she was born into slavery. She escaped to freedom in 1849. She was born in Maryland. All right, she became a conductor on the Underground Railroad, what is known as the Underground Railroad. Now, contrary to popular belief, it was not an actual railroad. It was a It was a group of paths, sometimes hidden rooms, things like that. There's a lot of folklore that has been taught about the Underground Railroad that's not true. Okay, just like this folk. Now we know she was called Moses, okay, because she freed her people, like the story in the Bible. But there's folklore about how they would sing "Swing Low, Sweet Chariot" when they knew she was coming. That's folklore. That's a myth. That wouldn't happen, because sooner or later the slave masters would have figured out. Wait a second, when they sing that song, the next day Negroes are gone. Okay, so that's folklore. And if you read TheRoot.com, which is an excellent source of African American news, TheRoot.com. Dr. Henry Lewis skipped the truth gates, is what we call him. I really don't care for him that much, but he does do some good work. Right now, he's doing a series called 100 Amazing Facts About the Negro. So J.A. Rogers did that book years ago, and he's going through and dealing with each fact that he talked about in there and analyzing it. So recently, and you can go to the website, pull this up, he dealt with the Underground Railroad and dispelling myths about it. And one of the myths about the Underground Railroad was that it was ran mainly by a group of benevolent white people and some African Americans, which is not true. The majority of the people who ran the Underground Railroad were freed slaves, former freed slaves, and free African Americans. You did have some Europeans that worked with them, but they were not the majority. And the majority of the Underground Railroad was in the North, not in the South, okay? Because you could be killed for helping slaves escape. Okay, so the majority of it was in the North. All right, but she's a conductor on the Underground Railroad. She makes at least 20 trips to the South to rescue slaves. She freed over 300 slaves, okay? And at one point she had a bounty on her head for over $40,000, but she still persisted. Okay. Now, one thing that a lot of people don't know is that when she was younger, she had some type of accident when she was hitting the head with a stone or a brick or something like that, and she developed narcolepsy. Okay, so she can have narcoleptic seizures at any point and pass out, uncontrollable, but she still persevered. Okay, and risked her life to save other slaves, and she carried a gun with her also. She never had to use it. She never lost a slave, number one, helping them escape, and she never had to use it on them. Because she used it on because she said, if you think you're going to turn back, okay, and not go on this journey with this, I'm going to kill you right here, because you're going to go back and tell where we are. We're not going to let that happen, okay? It's also a famous quote from her. I'm paraphrasing. She said, I freed hundreds of slaves, but I could have freed hundreds more if I could have only convinced them that they were slaves. Okay, because many of them, because that's the only life they knew, they really didn't know they were slaves, because everybody looked like them was a slave, so they just thought that's the way it was. All right, Henrietta Lacks. Okay, now how many people are familiar with Henrietta Lacks? Okay, this is a fantastic story. I first heard about this sister I think the first time I heard about it was in Hidden Colors 2. Anthony Browder talked about Henrietta Lacks, okay? And in addition to doing my show, I'm also on radio in Detroit, WCHB 1200 AM. I do a segment every other week on Your Voice with Angelo Henderson. So we do a segment dealing with African history and African American history. But this is a fascinating story about Henrietta Lacks. Rebecca Sloop wrote a book called The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. Now, this was a sister who was a poor tobacco farmer in Virginia, okay? Back in around 1951, she's 30 years old, she developed cervical cancer. She goes to the hospital to see what's wrong. There's a scientist at Johns Hopkins Hospital who takes a sample of her tumor, and he sends it off to be analyzed, and they found that her cells never died, okay? Because they had been trying to grow cells in the laboratory, all right? And they hadn't been able to do it. But for some reason, they couldn't figure out why. For some reason, this sister's cells never died and they replicated, okay? And they have used her cells to develop vaccines for polio. They also used it in scientific landmarks, including cloning, gene mapping, and in vitro fertilization, all right? This book here, The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, deals with this. And to this date, her family has never been compensated for her contribution to medicine, because they've made probably billions of dollars off of things they have created from her cells, okay? Her family found out about it by accident, and actually her cells were given the name HeLa cells, H-E-L-A, for the first two letters of a first name, first two letters of a last name, because they were hiding where they got them from. And through investigation, it found out that it came from her, but her own family members knew nothing about this, okay? So they're trying to get some type of compensation today. I'm following that case and see what happens. Now here's a picture of her with her husband, okay? Now even though they were poor tobacco farmers, you look at this sister, she looks like she could be Lena Horne's sister. She looks like she could star in a movie with Lena Horne or Dorothy Dandridge. And this says something about a dignity that many of us used to have about ourselves, even in poverty. We still had a dignity about ourselves, okay? Today, unfortunately, many of us have lost that. Many of our youth have lost that. This is why we have to teach them who they are, okay? Once again, what you do for yourself is based upon what you think about yourself. What you think about yourself is based upon what you've been taught about yourself. What you've been taught about yourself is based upon everything you've read, seen, and heard about yourself. So this is why we have to reverse what's going on and teach this information to our children. Here are a couple of articles on Henrietta Lacks also. One is from Smithsonian.com. Smithsonian.com is the official website of the Smithsonian Institute. Okay, and also there's another one. That one is entitled Henrietta Lacks Immortal Cells, and there's another one from the New York Times, The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, the sequel. So you can take a look at these here. Just give them back to me. You can pass them around. Just give those back to me. I need those for tomorrow. All right, how many people are familiar with Aset or ISIS? Okay, what do you know about Aset or ISIS? Anybody? Somebody raised their hand and said they knew about it. Go ahead.
Well, and I'm trying to remember, ISIS was fertility?
Yeah, that's one of them. The goddess of fertility, yes. Also, anybody else? Okay. Now, in ancient Kemet, Kemet, those who don't know, means land of the blacks. That's what we call it. Egypt is an Arabic word of Greek derivation. We didn't call it Egypt, okay? The Greeks called her Isis, okay, because the Greeks were taught by the ancient Kemetic people, ancient Egyptians, and what they're going to do is take the information and it goes into the filter of Greek culture. So a lot of their quote-unquote gods, we didn't call them gods, they were neter, singular, neteru, plural. Okay, calling them gods and goddesses, that's European. That's something that they did because they misunderstood what we were teaching them. Okay, African people always believed in one supreme force, one supreme being. We dealt with different manifestations or aspect of that one supreme being. Okay, Europeans misinterpret that and say we believe in many gods. No, that's not true. All right, but she was the wife of Asar. The Greeks called him Osiris. She was the mother of Heru, okay, also known as the Ka Rest, the rising of the spirit, later known as Christ or Christos. Christos first from the Greek, then Christ from English, okay. And in the story, I don't have a lot of time to get into the whole story, but in the story of Asar, Aset, and Heru, the first Holy Trinity, this story goes back somewhere between 8,000 to 10,000 BC. Okay, it goes back a long, long time ago. Asar is cut up into 14 pieces by his evil brother Set, or Setan, okay? And all the pieces are recovered except for one piece, the phallus, the penis. And there are a couple of different versions of the story, but most of them, the Nile catfish eat the penis. So she resurrects a tekken. The Greeks call it an obelisk. Today in the U.S. we call it the Washington Monument. Okay, she resurrects this as a symbol of the phallus and a symbol of resurrection. But she brings Asar back to life. Okay. Let me see here. Okay.